In a school where fear ruled the hallways, one boy held all the power until one girl dared to stand in his way. This is not just a story about a bully. It's the story of a broken boy, a fearless girl, and the battle to become something more than the mistakes of the past. Redemption is never easy, but for Ade, it's the only way forward. Hit that subscribe button now and join us for the full journey. Don't miss what happens next. In the heart of Lagos stood the prestigious Gold Crest Secondary School, a sprawling institution known for its strict rules and academic excellence. But behind the iron gates and well-kept lawns, a secret reigned, one shaped by power, fear, and silence. At the center of this secret was Ade Frederick, the notorious son of the school's founder, Mr. Fred. Ade wasn't just another senior student. He was a tall, broad-shouldered boy with sharp eyes and a cruel smirk that many students had come to fear. With just one glance, he could silence an entire hallway. His influence was rooted not just in fear, but in the unspoken knowledge that crossing him came with grave consequences. Ade's reputation for bullying wasn't just a rumor. He mocked students in front of the class, ripped up homework assignments. Still, no one dared to report him. Everyone knew that any complaint against Ada would magically vanish, thanks to Miss Jaina, the young, attractive literature teacher who was always seen defending him. Unknown to most, Miss Jaina wasn't just his protector. She was his secret lover. She ensured that all traces of Ade's misbehavior were erased before they reached the desk of the stern headmaster, Mr. Clement. Behind closed doors, Ade and Miss Jaina shared a twisted dynamic. Their bond was built on power, secrecy, and manipulation. She adored the attention and danger that came with being involved with the founder's son, while he enjoyed the immunity she provided. The students could only whisper among themselves, afraid that even a word out of place could bring Ade's wrath crashing down on them. As long as Miss Jaina remained loyal and Ade stayed untouchable, the balance of fear continued. Gold Crest was a school of shadows. Though the morning assembly was always filled with hopeful chants, uniform checks, and the headmaster's speeches about discipline and excellence, there was an undercurrent that everyone felt but dared not speak of: the Ade factor. He strolled through the school corridors like royalty, never bothering to wear a tie or tuck in his shirt like the rest of the students. The prefects turned a blind eye. Even the assistant principal avoided confrontation. Everyone knew that messing with Ade was a death sentence for their peace in school. Ada wasn't just feared because of his father. He was smart, not book smart, but clever. He knew how to make people feel small without laying a finger on them. He could ruin reputations with rumors, turn friends against each other, or make a teacher feel incompetent with just a sarcastic question in class. One time, a new teacher tried to punish him for talking during her lesson. The next day, she was gone, transferred to a remote school outside town. No explanations. After that, no teacher dared challenge him, except Miss Jaina. But even her scoldings were laced with smiles and admiration. To most, Miss Jaina was a role model. Young, stylish, and eloquent, she was loved by parents and praised by staff. But no one suspected what happened after school hours. In the quiet of her office, or sometimes in Ada's car, the two shared stolen moments, filled with secrets, passion, and plans. Miss Jaina wasn't just protecting Ada because she liked him. She was obsessed. She saw him as her ticket to power, her escape from a dull life. And Ada? He liked having someone on the inside. Someone who would cover for him, clean up his messes, and keep his name untarnished. But the school was about to change forever. A new student was on her way, someone with fire in her eyes and no fear in her heart. And Ade's world? It was about to be shaken. Ade noticed her too. He was leaning on the wall near the science block, laughing loudly with his clique when Chioma passed by. The laughter stopped. Time slowed. His eyes followed her figure down the corridor. She didn't even look in his direction. That had never happened before. Every new girl usually sought his attention. But Chioma? She walked past like he didn't exist. For the first time in a long while, Ade was intrigued. By break time, he had already asked 2 people about her. She was from the East, transferred from a top school in Enugu. Her father was a military man. Her grades were top-notch. But more importantly, She didn't seem impressed by status or money. Ade tried to make a move later that day, walking up to her during lunch with his trademark smirk and a compliment on her earrings. She looked up, unimpressed, and replied calmly, "I don't talk to bullies." Ade blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Chioma said, picking up her tray. "Save your charm for someone who doesn't know your type." And just like that, she walked away. Ade didn't sleep well that night. No girl had ever spoken to him like that, especially not in public. His pride had taken a serious hit. His friends laughed it off, thinking it was a one-time thing. But Ade wasn't laughing. He sat in his room, scrolling through Chioma's barely active social media, trying to understand what made her different. Why did her rejection sting more than he expected? The next morning, he tried again. He offered to help her carry her books between classes. She declined. He asked if she wanted to study in the library with him. She didn't even respond. Some students began to notice the change. The once arrogant bully was now trailing behind a girl who barely gave him the time of day. It was almost comical. Miss Jaina noticed too. From her classroom window, she saw Ade talking to Chioma again. Her brows tightened. She had never seen him chase after a girl. Not like this. That night, she confronted Ade in her office. "What's going on with that new girl?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "She's just different," Ade admitted, leaning against the desk. "She's not like the others." Miss Jaina's eyes narrowed. "Different how?" The room went silent for a moment. Miss Jaina placed a hand on Addie's chest, her voice softer now. "You know I'm always here for you, right?" Ade gave a weak smile, but his thoughts were still with Chioma. Miss Jaina's heart sank. A dangerous mix of jealousy and suspicion brewed in her mind. For years, she had Ade all to herself. But now, this new girl, this Chioma, was changing everything. And Miss Jaina was not about to let that happen. Chioma wasn't trying to be a hero. She just wasn't raised to tolerate nonsense. When she saw Ade tormenting a junior student in the hallway, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight up to him. "Ade, leave him alone," she said, her voice steady. Ade turned, surprised. The crowd around them went silent. No one dared to interfere when Ade was in one of his moods, but Chioma did. "This doesn't concern you," Ade replied, trying to keep his cool in front of the students. "It does when you're harassing someone who can't fight back. You think fear makes you powerful?" The junior student ran off while Chioma stood her ground, arms folded, daring him to do something. Ade looked at her, speechless. He wasn't used to confrontation. Not like this. Chioma wasn't shouting or crying. She was simply unbothered by him. After that incident, word spread quickly through the school. Chioma was becoming something of a quiet legend. Even students who once bowed their heads when Ade passed started walking with a bit more confidence. It wasn't just Chioma's beauty anymore. It was her courage. Ade couldn't decide whether to feel humiliated or impressed. He knew he should have made an example of her, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Not with fear, but pity. Miss Jaina, however, wasn't amused. "She's undermining your authority," she said sharply during one of their secret meetings. "She's not like the rest," Ade replied. "I can see that," Miss Jaina muttered, her eyes dark. "And I don't like it." Miss Jaina's jealousy morphed into obsession. Every smile Ade gave to Chioma, every attempt he made to impress her, it drove a dagger deeper into Miss Jaina's heart. For 3 years, she had been Ade's secret, his confidant, his protector, his lover. And now, a 17-year-old girl was threatening to destroy all of it. She started keeping tabs on Chioma, watching her from the staff room window, listening in on conversations, and even going through Chioma's student file when no one was looking. The more she learned, the more threatened she felt. Chioma wasn't just bold. She was intelligent, top of her class, and already gaining the admiration of teachers and students alike. One evening, Miss Jaina confronted Ade. "She's playing you," she hissed. "Don't be fooled. Girls like that, they'll use you and throw you away." Ade shook his head. "She hasn't even accepted me, Jaina. She doesn't want anything from me." Miss Jaina's voice dropped. "But I want you. I've always wanted you." There was silence between them. Ade looked away. He was no longer the arrogant boy she had once controlled. Something was changing in him, and Kiyoma was the reason. Miss Jaina saw it. She felt it. And deep inside, a dark thought was forming. If Kiyoma wouldn't back down, maybe she needed a lesson. A painful one. As she sat in her empty classroom after hours, staring at the growing darkness outside, Miss Jaina made a quiet decision. If she couldn't have Ade to herself, no one else could either. Ade began to change, slowly but noticeably. He no longer shouted at students for fun, and he didn't strut through the halls like a king. He still had his reputation, yes, but something about Chiyoma's presence was reshaping him. He started helping out quietly in class, volunteering to clean the board or answer questions properly. A few teachers even began to smile at him again, surprised at the shift. Chiyoma, meanwhile, kept her guard up. She saw the change in Ade, but she wasn't naive. A bully turning good because of a girl? Please, she told her friend Ada during lunch. He's trying to impress me, but I'm not here for that. Still, Chiyoma couldn't deny that something in Ade's eyes had softened. He stopped bothering other students, and even stood up for a younger boy who was being mocked by some seniors. Rumors flew. Some said he had fallen deeply in love. Others whispered about a secret promise he made to change. Chiyoma said nothing. She just watched. Miss Jaina, however, watched everything. Her lessons became shorter, her temper sharper. The other staff began to notice that she wasn't herself, but they chalked it up to stress. Nobody suspected what was truly going on in her mind. The dark storm brewing behind her professional smile. One evening, Miss Jaina approached a group of rough boys who hung around the motor park behind the school fence. They weren't students, just jobless, dangerous types. She offered them money, and they listened. She gave them a name. Chiyoma. The leader raised an eyebrow. You want us to scare her? She leaned in and whispered. No. I want you to break her. Chiyoma stayed late in school one Friday to finish a class project in the computer lab. The school was almost empty, the sky already painted in orange and purple hues as the sun set. She didn't notice the three figures lingering by the back fence. They weren't students. They weren't teachers. They didn't belong. Miss Jaina stood across the street in a car, engine idling, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. She hadn't planned to witness it, but something in her needed to see it, to confirm that Chiyoma would no longer be a threat. As Chiyoma packed up her books and stepped out into the quiet path that led behind the school building, the three men moved. But Ade had been watching too. He hadn't meant to. He had only been waiting nearby, hoping to walk Chiyoma to the gate. But when he saw the shadows following her, something in his chest snapped. He took off running. The moment the men tried to grab Chiyoma, Ade flew into them with fury he hadn't felt in years. He punched, kicked, and shouted for help. Chiyoma screamed and fought too, biting one of the men's hands. A security guard heard the commotion and came rushing with a flashlight. The men fled. Chiyoma was shaking, bruised but unharmed. Ade stood in front of her, breathless, blood on his knuckles, heart racing. He looked at her with worry and something deeper. Fear that he could have lost her. Later, in the school clinic, Chiyoma held Ade's hand for the first time. You saved my life, she whispered. He said nothing. But in that moment, the walls he had built for years finally crumbled. And across town, Miss Jaina sat alone, realizing her plan had failed, and the consequences were coming. The following Monday, the atmosphere at Gold Crest was electric. Whispers filled the classrooms, corridors, and even the teacher's lounge. The story had spread like wildfire. Chiyoma was attacked, and Ada saved her. The school was stunned. Ada, the untouchable bully, had become a hero overnight. Chiyoma returned to school after the weekend with a few visible bruises and bandages. But she held her head high. She didn't hide. In fact, she walked taller. Not because she was proud, but because she was determined not to let fear break her. Ade was quieter than usual that day. He stuck close to Chiyoma, but never too close, respecting her space. For the first time, he didn't try to impress her. He just wanted to protect her. During break time, Chiyoma walked up to him by the school garden. You okay? She asked. I should be asking you that, Ade replied, trying to smile. She nodded slowly. I'm still scared. But I'm not broken. Ade looked down. I won't let anyone touch you again, ever. There was a long silence. Then, to his surprise, Chiyoma reached out and hugged him. It wasn't romantic. It was gratitude. trust, and it meant more to him than any kiss Miss Jaina had ever given. Meanwhile, in the staff room, the headmaster had received a report from the security guard who witnessed the attack. Names were being mentioned, descriptions were being compared, and one name came up that shocked him. Miss Jaina. Miss Jaina tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. Her outfits were still sharp, her smile is still charming, but the tension in her jaw and the tightness in her voice betrayed her. She knew the net was closing in. That Tuesday morning, she was summoned to the headmaster's office. Mr. Clement, a stern man with sharp eyes, wasted no time. He laid the printed security report on the table. There's a claim that you were seen across the street during the attempted assault on Kioma. Witnesses say you left moments after the attackers fled. Miss Jaina froze. That's ridiculous. I live nearby. I drive past here all the time. Then why didn't you report anything to the police? Or the school? She fumbled. I didn't know what was happening until after I had left. Mr. Clement narrowed his eyes. Miss Jaina, you've always been very close to Ade, and now that he's getting close to Kioma, a student gets attacked. The coincidence is too sharp to ignore. Miss Jaina tried to maintain her composure, but the sweat on her brow betrayed her. She left the office with her world beginning to fall apart. Later that evening, the police arrived at the school. The 3 attackers had been arrested in a raid. One of them had already confessed they had been paid to attack Chioma. And the person who paid them? Miss Jaina. By the end of the week, she was in handcuffs. Students gathered at the school gates as she was led into a police car. Some gasped. Some whispered. And aid? He just stood silently, watching the woman he once trusted disappear into a world of consequences. In the days following Miss Jaina's arrest, the atmosphere at Gold Crest shifted again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Whispers filled the air. But the whispers weren't about scandal anymore. They were about change. And the change had a name. Ade. No one could believe it. Ade, the boy who used to shove juniors into lockers and tear up assignment books, was now helping students with homework. He sat quietly during lectures, no longer interrupting. He even stood up for a female student who was being harassed by 2 boys near the cafeteria. The entire school was watching him like he was a different person. And maybe he was. His encounter with Kioma, and the danger she had faced, had changed him more than he realized. For the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to care about someone else's well-being more than his own pride or power. Chioma had stood up to him when no one else did. She taught him that respect was more powerful than fear. One afternoon, the headmaster called him into the office. Ade braced himself for a lecture, but instead, Mr. Clement said, I've noticed your behavior lately. I don't know if it's guilt, or if you've really changed. But whatever it is, keep it up. Ade nodded, surprised. Thank you, sir. As he walked out of the office, students parted for him, not out of fear, but out of respect. For the first time, Ade felt something deeper than power. He felt peace. And still, through it all, Chioma remained by his side, not as his girlfriend, but as his friend. His first real one. With Miss Jaina gone and her crimes exposed, investigations dug deeper into her relationship with Ade. The news sent shockwaves through the school board and parent body. Mr. Fred, Ada's father and the school's founder, was furious, not at the school, but at his own son. You had a relationship with a teacher? Mr. Fred roared in his home office. Do you know what this could do to my name? My school? Ade didn't flinch. He had prepared for this moment. I know what I did, Dad. I was wrong. But I'm not that person anymore. Mr. Fred shook his head. You embarrassed me. I embarrassed myself, Ade replied, and I'm fixing it. The words hung in the air. For the first time, Mr. Fred saw his son, not the spoiled boy he had protected for years, but a young man taking responsibility for his mistakes. Meanwhile, Chioma's bravery inspired more students. A few juniors came forward about being bullied in the past. Some even admitted that Ade had once tormented them, but instead of punishment, the headmaster chose a different path. Forgiveness and rebuilding. Ade was asked to speak during a special school assembly. At first, he hesitated, but Chioma encouraged him. When the day came, he stood in front of the entire school, nervous, but honest. I used to think fear made me powerful, he began. I was wrong. It made me empty. I hurt people who didn't deserve it, and I can't take that back. But I can be better, and I will. The hall went silent. Then, applause. Real applause. Ade walked off the stage and looked to the corner where Kiyoma stood, smiling softly. She gave him a thumbs up and mouthed, "You did good." A month had passed since the incident, and things had truly changed at Gold Crest Secondary. With Miss Jaina gone, a new female teacher was brought in to take her place. Mrs. Mabel, a soft-spoken but firm woman who didn't tolerate nonsense. She immediately connected with Kiyoma and even praised Ade for his recent transformation, though she kept a professional distance. Ade found himself spending more time with people he had once ignored or intimidated. For the first time, he actually listened to people, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. It was strange, even for him, how light he felt without constantly pretending to be the feared prince of the school. Kiyoma and Ade's friendship grew stronger each day. They studied together in the library, shared jokes under the mango tree near the assembly hall, and talked about life beyond the school gates. She even encouraged him to join the school's debate team, surprising everyone, including himself. "I don't know anything about public speaking," he said one afternoon. "You didn't know anything about being a decent human either, and look at you now," Kiyoma teased with a smile. He laughed, genuinely. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep and honest, the kind of laugh he never had around Miss Jaina. For Ade, this wasn't just redemption. It was rebirth. One quiet Friday afternoon, as they both sat under the tree after classes, Kiyoma sipping her malt drink and Ade flipping through a book he barely understood, he turned to her. "Kiyoma," he said, voice serious for once, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, already sensing where the question was going. "Go ahead." He paused. "I know I've done a lot of wrong, but I've changed, I've tried. And I care about you. A lot." She lowered her drink, her expression unreadable. "I want you to be my girlfriend," he continued, eyes steady. "Not because I saved you, not because I feel entitled, but because I like you. I respect you." There was a long silence. Kiyoma exhaled softly, looking down at her drink. Then her voice came, calm, kind, and clear. "Ade, you've really changed, and I'm proud of you, but I'm not ready for that. I don't want a relationship. Not now." Ade looked down, hiding his disappointment. "I understand." She reached over and touched his hand. "But I want to keep being your friend, a real one, someone who'll tell you when you're messing up, and someone who believes in you even when no one else does." His heart ached, but he smiled anyway, because for the first time in his life, someone saw him for who he was, not who he pretended to be. And that meant more than any yes ever could. Days passed, and Ade's life continued to improve. He was no longer the outcast bully. He had friends, real ones. His bond with Kiyoma remained strong, despite the clear lines they had drawn between themselves. Ade respected her decision, even if it left a small ache in his chest. He knew he wasn't ready for a relationship either. Not yet. But friendship, real and genuine, was more than enough. Yet, the shadow of his past never truly left him. The guilt from everything he had done to the students, to Miss Jaina, and to himself still weighed on him. He often found himself walking the school's halls, haunted by memories of past mistakes. One afternoon, while walking to the restroom, Ade overheard a conversation between two students. They were talking about how Miss Jaina had been arrested, about the damage she'd caused to so many lives, including their own. "Did you hear?" one of them said. "Miss Jaina is in jail. She's been arrested for what she did to Kiyoma. That whole thing with Ade, it was because of her." His stomach turned. They weren't talking about him with respect or sympathy. They were still seeing him as part of the damage. In that moment, Ade realized something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. His past wasn't just about the power he held over others. It was about what he had done to himself. He had torn down his own worth by allowing Miss Jaina to manipulate him, by hiding behind fear and cruelty for so long. But he wasn't that person anymore. The next day, during assembly, Ade stood before the students again. It wasn't a grand speech like the one he gave before, where the school had applauded him. This time, it was quieter, more personal. He addressed the entire school, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "I want to say something," he began, voice steady. "When I first came here, I thought power came from fear. I thought people respected me because they were scared of me, but I was wrong. The truth is, I wasn't a king. I was a coward. I hurt people because I was too scared to face who I really was. A few students whispered, glancing at each other. Ade ignored them, pushing through his discomfort. I've made a lot of mistakes in the past. Some of them are unforgivable. But I'm trying. I'm working every day to be a better person, to be someone who stands up for others, who learns from his mistakes, and who doesn't hide behind walls. He paused, feeling the weight of his words settle in the air. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that I can be someone different. There was a long silence, and then the first clap. Then another. Slowly, the whole room broke into applause. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was real. It wasn't about his past anymore. It was about his future. Chioma, who had been standing in the crowd, smiled softly at him. No words were exchanged, but the understanding between them was clear. He didn't need to prove himself to her anymore. He had already done that, to himself. The weeks following Ade's heartfelt speech were filled with changes. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. His relationship with his peers shifted. No longer was he the feared bully. Now, he was a classmate. Someone they could rely on. Someone who was learning to be part of a community. There were still those who didn't fully trust him. But the majority saw the effort he was putting in. But as the days wore on, Ade began to face something deeper than the external judgments. It was the internal battle he had to win. No matter how much he changed, no matter how many students began to look at him differently, he still felt the weight of his past decisions hanging over him. One day, while walking alone in the school's courtyard, Ade found himself thinking about Miss Yena. He remembered how she used to smile at him, how she made him feel special, even when he was awful to others. It wasn't just a romantic connection, it was the first time someone had cared for him, or so he thought. But now, he understood. She had manipulated him. She had used him to get what she wanted, just as she had used others. And as the truth settled in, he felt a pang of regret. Not just for his actions, but for the innocence he had lost by letting her guide him down such a dark path. The burden of his past was something he knew he couldn't erase, but he could choose to move forward. And that was what he was trying to do, one day at a time. The school year was coming to an end, and the final exams loomed over every student. Ade, for the first time, felt a sense of true determination. He wasn't going to fail, not just in his studies, but in life. He had too much at stake now, too much that he had worked hard to rebuild. Chioma had become his closest friend. She helped him study for exams, encouraging him when he doubted himself. "You're doing great," she'd say, her smile reassuring. "You've come so far." But their friendship, while close, still had its limits. Chioma never treated him like a savior. She didn't hold him up on a pedestal. She saw him for who he was, not as the bully who hurt people, but as a young man trying to make amends. One afternoon, as they studied together, Ade looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. He realized that he didn't need her to love him back in the way he had once hoped. Her friendship was everything. But as the final bell rang and they packed up their things, he stood by the door, hesitating. "Chioma," he said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. For everything. You were the one who made me believe I could change." She smiled, and her eyes softened. "No, Ade. You did it yourself. I just reminded you of who you really are." There was no dramatic confession of love. There was no grand gesture. But as Ade walked out of the school gates with Chioma, side by side, he realized he didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He had already proven the most important thing. That he could be better. The end of the school year brought with it a bittersweet feeling. As the final exams wrapped up, students were already looking ahead to the summer break. But for Ade, this was a moment of reflection. He had changed more than he could have ever imagined when he first entered Gold Crest Secondary, and the weight of those changes was heavy on his heart. He had no illusions. He knew the road to redemption was a long one, and while he had earned the trust of many, there were still some who doubted him. And perhaps always would, but that was no longer his concern. For the first time, Ade was at peace with himself. Chioma stood by his side through all of it. She had watched him grow, silently cheering him on every step of the way. There was a quiet understanding between them now. No more expectations. No more pressure. Just a deep and unwavering friendship. As the school closed for the summer, Ade stood at the gates, his hand resting on the worn wood. "Thanks for everything, Chioma," he said softly. She turned to him, her smile warm. "It's been a pleasure, Ade. I'm proud of you. You've come a long way." He nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." With that, they parted ways for the summer, each of them looking forward to what lay ahead. For Ade, that meant continuing his journey of change, not just for the school, but for his own future. The months of summer passed by quickly. Ade spent his days volunteering at the local community center, helping kids with their schoolwork, and working part-time at a cafe to save up for college. He kept in touch with Chioma, and they talked often. Sometimes, they studied together. Other times, they just enjoyed each other's company, sharing stories about their plans for the future. As the new school year approached, Ade felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer the boy who hid behind power and cruelty. He was a young man who understood the true value of respect, kindness, and hard work. One afternoon, while walking down the street near the school, Ade ran into an old friend from his past. His name was Femi, a former student who had once been one of Ade's victims. Femi was now attending a different school, and his eyes were filled with curiosity when he saw Ade. "Ade?" Femi said, his voice cautious. "Hey, Femi," Ade replied, a little surprised. "How have you been?" Femi paused, studying him. "You've really changed, haven't you?" Ade nodded, a slight smile on his face. "Yeah, I'm trying to." For a moment, there was silence. Then Femi extended his hand. "I just wanted to say, I didn't think you'd ever change. But I'm glad you did. Maybe we can start fresh too." Ade shook his hand, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The past, the mistakes, the pain, it was all still there, but in that moment, it no longer defined him. He had the chance to start over. As the school year began, Ade walked back to Gold Crest, not as the bully, not as the one everyone feared, but as a new person, a person who knew who he was and what he stood for. And with Chioma's friendship by his side, he knew that whatever the future held, he was ready for it.